Hi, I'm Monica Bueller, Director of Acel Conceptions.
And I am Jessica, second-time surrogate.
And how far along are you in this pregnancy?
I am 16 weeks pregnant, in the second journey, delivered first surrogate baby, October 2023.
And how are you feeling this pregnancy?
Amazing. I mean, it's just flying by. I can't believe that my next appointment's already like the 20-week anatomy scan. Like, how did that even happen?
Right, so we always kind of joke, like, it takes forever. You feel like in the screening process or even to get matched, takes forever. That's like hurrying and waiting, and then once you're pregnant, it flies by.
Yeah, totally.
Perfect. What I wanted to talk to you, Jessica, about was your first surrogacy when you had a positive HCG, which is a positive blood test, saying that we're pregnant, so we're excited for the next stage, which is the heartbeat ultrasound to confirm the pregnancy. And at that stage, there was no heartbeat at that ultrasound. So I really wanted to talk about that experience and kind of the feelings and the process and what that looked like for you, because unfortunately, this is a pretty common experience. And so we really just want to talk about kind of like all variations of what surrogacy, and what surrogacy can look like across the board.
Yeah, absolutely. So, this was back in 2019 or something, and we went through the transfer. Like you said, long journey to get there. So we were very excited, very anxious, which I think is a feeling across the board with any journey.
Lots of feels to get there.
Exactly. So everything went great for the transfer. We did get positive HCG results. They were low, so Monica, with her experience, was always just like, okay, let's proceed cautiously, right? Cautiously optimistic was kind of the theme for that one. Because while it was still positive, it just wasn't
indicating that it
was
maybe
a viable, right? So, as a surrogate, you're still feeling very hopeful. I'm still feeling very hopeful. HCG levels can range so much. That, it could range from person to person and pregnancy to pregnancy. So
when the embryo implanted,
exactly,
blah,
there's
blah,
so
blah,
many factors, right? And one HCG level doesn't necessarily indicate yes or no at that point, right?
Right.
So we're proceeding with caution, and then we went in for another HCG test. 2 days later, numbers were rising, right, which they wanted to see, but still were not rising a lot. So we went in for a heartbeat ultrasound, but it was earlier than you would typically go to because they kind of wanted to see what was going on.
To get an idea.
Things are so tiny in there at that point, right? So it's hard to gauge really where we're headed. And at that point, they saw a gestational sac, right? So embryo tried to implant and do what it was supposed to be doing. And there, you feel a little
like a glimmer.
Down. Well, yeah, like a little glimmer of hope, because you're like, oh, well, maybe it's there. But then also on the flip side, you start Googling, right?
Yeah.
Which you shouldn't.
The Google rabbit hole.
Yes, and you start to see that, well,
it could be this,
it could be
this,
so
and
many
this.
things. It could go this way, it could go that way. So at that point, I was pretty.
Well, you're disappointed. You feel like it's your fault. You don't know how to feel about it. You feel like,
I did
is this my fault?
Yep.
All the feels. You're disappointed. You're sad for your intended parents.
Everything, and
all of it.
And it was about probably a good year up until that point, right? And I knew that in that situation, our intended parents didn't have any other embryos, and it's just like, oh my gosh,
it's pressure.
What did I do?
You put nobody's putting that pressure on you, but you put it on yourself.
Exactly. And I'm eager to get going, right? Like 100%. I'm excited to be a surrogate. I'm excited to carry, somebody's little baby, and the compensation, of course. You're eager to get started on that.
Next phase of that, 100%.
And then at that point, we had to wait another week to go in for another ultrasound. And again, at that point, still nothing had progressed. My HCG levels were, right? Which was interesting. And then again, you're even more hopeful and confused. You're like, well, why is that happening?
Because your body hasn't caught up to what's going on hormonally, right?
So I was feeling pregnant. My body said I was pregnant, but what was happening inside, it wasn't, right? And I think at that point, I was just kind of like down in the dumps, because we were still having to do injections. We were still having to take medication. I mean, that's what you sign up for as a surrogate, right? We're committed to the process, and that includes all the medications. But at that point, it was definitely a feeling of like a bummer of, oh my gosh, I still have to do this, even though I know it's not gonna, result in the way that we wanted to. So all of the feelings, lots of pressure, but again, I knew, with the support of Monica and the team, it's like, we did
get through it.
Our bodies as a surrogate are literally the best place for these babies and embryos to, attempt to grow. So, I do remember feeling too, like that first email that comes through with the HCG, and it was so low, and I was just like,
oh, it's hard.
Yeah.
And we talk a lot about this with the girls too, and really try to, it's hard not to take on that burden yourself, and it's okay to be in your feels that day and kind of be like, ugh, but then we got to like move on and be like, okay, we're going to get through this. We're going to talk about it, and if we cry, we cry. And then if we move on, and then we'll be like, okay, this is what we're going to do next and move on.
Exactly.
Or if this, like in her case, they didn't have embryos. Okay, well then what's the next plan from here? What does this look like for you moving forward? And then we discuss it from there.
Exactly.
So it's, but it's okay to be emotional. It's okay to feel disappointed. It's okay to feel sad. But the key is to not, and it's easier said than done, but not to take on that as it's your fault. Right. Because
it's not.
It's not.
Right.
You've gone to your appointments, you've taken your medications as you're told, you've done everything that you physically and emotionally can do. At that point, it's just what that embryo needs to develop, and that's out of everyone's control. Physicians, it's just, the universe has to do its work, and that's hard.
Yeah, it is. And and looking back at that situation, I mean, everything happens for a reason, right? And timing is everything.
Right.
So my life continued on. We took a pause. I had my own son, right?
Yeah, your second baby.
My second baby, and if that hadn't gone the way that it did, then he wouldn't be here. So everything happens for a reason.
Right, and then you went on to have, now you're on number 2. Yeah, so again, like, it's the broken path, but it was the right path, right? Yeah, so, well, thank you so much for sharing. I know it's not always easy talking about that stuff, but I really always want to make sure that we talk about that it's not always like butterfly and rainbows. These are real things that happen, and so that everyone knows that they're not alone if this happens, and that the support's there when it does happen, and that we will get through it for sure.
And then just to circle back, somebody might be wondering, well, what happens after that, right?
Oh, yeah. Oh, good point.
So after we determined that it wasn't viable, we had another ultrasound to confirm. So by that time, gestationally, I was probably around 7 to 8 weeks, right? The doctors and the medical staff gives you options on how to pass the tissue, because there is tissue in there that needs to come out, so to speak. But I ended up opting out to have a DNC, and of course that was discussed with between me, my husband, and the medical providers, and that was the best decision for me in that moment. So again, not something that anybody really wants to go through. I mean, it is
it's a procedure. It's
invasive,
right?
And we just trust in the team, and again, not what was the plan, but
we get
very much part of the journey.
Right, exactly. Exactly. So that's a good point too. Like, so there's options. It's always discussed, like, what's best for you, what's best for the timing, where you're at, and like what's, the doctors make these decisions with you, for sure. For sure. Oh, well, thank you so much for sharing. I appreciate you so much. Okay, thank you so much.